Hey everyone, it's Saoirse. Today's video is a partnership with IQ Student Accommodation as part of their monthly book club. So if you're in the book club, hi, it's lovely to be speaking to you. So today I want to talk about being a writer and a reader during the pandemic. So this month's pick is the Decameron Project, and it's a collection of 29 stories that were written during the pandemic. And I've only read 7 of them so far, but I love the idea of this book, the concept of it as a modern day Decameron, which is the 1353 book of 100 nested tales by people who are passing the time in Florence waiting out the plague. If you're in the book club, you already know this. Now there's this part that I love in the introduction, and it is talking about all the different books that have used this sort of structure in the past. And it says, in all these cases, the stories in one way or another are life-saving. Even as they're being entertaining is one of the main ways they can save a life. Reading stories in difficult times is a way to understand those times, and also a way to persevere through them. So I think for a lot of us, living through the actual real-life pandemic is hard enough, and so we don't always want nonfiction. So these are all fiction, and that can be a way to cope with real life, because we know when the stories were inspired, we know when they were written, but not everyone has to be blatantly hitting you over the head with things that we already see all the time in the news. And I think this goes for anything. Reading fiction is a way to escape, and it's also a way to understand the real things that we're going through. And also, like at the end of the introduction, it says, "Memento mori, remember that you must die, is a worthy and necessary message for ordinary times when you might forget. Memento vivere, remember that you must live, is the message of the Decameron." I just think that's really important, that we have been so inundated with horror and death and fear over the past almost 2 years now. And it is important for us to remember that there are things to live for. And what I love about a collection of short stories, especially when it's by a bunch of different people, they have different perspectives, and it gives you just this small look at the world. It's everything in the world put in a few hundred pages for you to easily digest and get a glimpse at how everybody has coped with the same thing, because we're all collectively dealing with it. So I want to talk about my personal story of the pandemic. I was in grad school. I had moved to Scotland to do a creative writing master's, and the first semester went great, and then the second semester started, and I remember the first thing that I heard about the pandemic at all was in January of 2020. We heard that one of the students wasn't in class because she was very worried about her family because they were in Wuhan and something was happening there. And I remember feeling really bad for her, and not for a moment thinking that it was going to be a global thing. I just had no idea. I don't think anybody really did. So that was January. February, I flew back to Florida to go to my sister's wedding. Now things were already getting a little bit weird at university, and it wasn't even related to the pandemic, but our teachers were on strike, so we weren't really having classes. And then once March came around, it became a lot more clear that things were going to become global, and the virus was coming to Scotland, and there was nothing we could do about it. And they were talking about closing the university. During our, I think we had like a spring break or something, the last thing I did before lockdown was go to the Highlands with my friend, and we got back on my birthday. And I think that was the day that they closed all of the restaurants and all of the pubs in the UK. And I remember feeling so scared. It was something I'd never felt before, this just this invisible thing that was coming, and we didn't know how bad it would be, and we didn't know what was going to happen next. And I tried to focus on, short-term things, like, are they going to shut down the university? And they did. And I remember I really wanted them to just, like, let's just get through our last couple weeks. Like, we only have a couple weeks. We've already lost so much of this semester to the strikes. But they shut it down, and because most of the teachers couldn't figure out how to properly transition into online learning, we didn't really get much of a second semester. So we were thrown into having to write our dissertations in lockdown. And I know that lockdowns were different all over the world. The one that we had in Scotland was pretty strict from the end of March to like mid-July. It was everything shut except for the grocery store pretty much. And I spent all of the time writing my dissertation in my flat, and I didn't have like a great setup. I had a little desk, but I'll be honest, I like to make my desk look cozy and all that, but I'm not much of a sitting at a desk person because I have really bad back pain, so I tend to have a lap desk and just kind of move around. I float to different places wherever I am. I usually end up on a couch. So I managed somehow to get everything done for my final essay for one of my classes and the dissertation. And one of the big benefits of being in lockdown was that I had so much reading time. I suddenly had so much time, and I hadn't had that much time to read for pleasure before this because in grad school for a creative writing degree, we were reading a lot. Like, we had to read pretty long books every week, and that meant I couldn't read anything that I had chosen. So all of a sudden, everything stops, the world stops, and I came up with this routine that worked out really well and actually makes me kind of jealous of my past self because this year I'm really struggling to come up with a routine. But I remember kind of like letting go of my initial fear of what is going to happen, and am I going to be able to get back home, and what if I can't get a flight back with my cats, because I had brought my cats to Scotland, so I was not going to leave without them. I was just terrified, but I set that aside, and I've gotten into this routine where I called it like the rule of fives. I would read at least 50 pages a day. I would write at least 5 pages a day. And I would walk at least 5 miles a day. And I usually hit this goal every day. Typically I'd wake up, I'd sleep like the exact same number of hours every night. I think I was sleeping like 11 to 8 or something. And then I'd get up and read for like 2 hours in my bed usually. And I'd work on either my essay or my dissertation once the essay was done. And it kept me going, having this structure, because I think that was the hardest thing for so many people, especially students, was that we just lost our routine. We lost our structure. We were used to being these busy people, and then all of a sudden there was just nothing. There were no meetings to go to. There were no classes. We were supposed to have dissertation meetings face-to-face with our supervisors. Those ended up being on Zoom. But yeah, we were, knowing that we were all kind of in the same situation, like even in my small little world where it was just the people in my program, I knew we were all in our individual flats writing our dissertations. It was kind of comforting, but at the same time I just really missed everyone. And one thing that was sad about it was that my program, everyone in it had written and self-published this book together. So we almost all submitted a story for it, and we published this book from Arthur's Seat, and everything was student designed, and we were so excited because we were going to have a book launch, and it was going to be at a bookstore in Edinburgh. I went to the University of Edinburgh, I don't think I said that, and it got cancelled, obviously, so we did it on Zoom and had it publishing live to YouTube. And, you know, I'll never know what that experience would have been like if it had gone the way that it was supposed to. I was really excited to have, you know, for most of us it was our first time that we were going to be in public reading our writing from a book where our writing was actually for sale. That was a dream for a lot of us, and doing it on Zoom was a little weird, but that was just one of the first weird things that was going to happen in the next couple of years. But we did what we could, and it turned out really well. But we had to, another weird thing was we had to hand out the books, like everybody from the program who ordered one for themselves. I was part of like the couple of people that were in charge of passing them all out. And we went to the university and met up, totally socially distanced, and like wore gloves, because at this time nobody had access to masks, nobody was wearing them. This was early on, and we had gloves on, and we would like drop the book on the ground and run away, and then the person would pick it up, and it was so sad. It was just really sad because we had been so close, this group. I mean, there were only about 50 of us in the program, and now we were not able to hug each other or really feel comfortable talking, you know. But anyway, throughout the summer and throughout all of the pandemic, because it's still not over and it's been almost 2 years, I've continued YouTubing, where I share books. If you're on my channel right now, you know that's what I do. I share what I've been reading, I share some things about writing, and that's been kind of cathartic to be able to communicate, stay in touch with other readers and writers that way. Because that's the thing about stories, they really do bring us together, and it's nice to have the escapism of, you know, I don't really talk much about what's currently going on my channel. I'll just talk about whatever book that I have that week. And it's great to see everybody comment and say their thoughts about that book, and we're kind of all like for a while not thinking about what's going on in the world. So that's been good. I'll say it was weird trying to write my dissertation while the world was kind of on fire, because my dissertation, and I had planned this way before the pandemic, it has like an apocalyptic theme to it. So I was writing this sort of end of the world story with the world actually feeling like it was ending outside. Just a strange juxtaposition, and it was hard, and it's still hard to feel like what I write has any meaning when there's such bigger things going on. And I think that's a trap that a lot of writers fall into, that we think, you know, our voices don't matter and we should be silent because, you know, our little stories, whether they're fiction or memoir, can't possibly mean anything in the big picture. And it's just not true, and we've got to get out of that mindset, because you don't know if there is one person in the world who needs to hear your story. And I know that there are stories that have touched me when I needed them the most, and I'm really glad that they were there and that person chose to write. So yeah, if there's any writers watching, my advice is just write. And I need to take that advice myself, because it has been really hard, especially this year, I think more than last year, trying to motivate myself. One thing I've done is write letters, not super frequently, but writing and receiving letters, I think it's such a beautiful, you'd call it old-fashioned romantic thing to do, form of communication, but it is so special to have a tangible piece of someone's thoughts, especially handwritten. It's such a beautiful way to remind ourselves that we are not alone, and words have such an impact on us. I mean, I've read letters from friends and I've been in a bad place, and it just makes me smile and feel less alone, because haven't we all felt so isolated? I mean, literally for most of us. At one point, or another during the past couple of years we've had to be alone, and just digital communication is not enough for most people. And so I think, letters are a very important way to stay in touch, and it's something that not a lot of people think about because it is so antiquated. But definitely try it if you haven't, and go all out and make it fancy. And I have a wax seal that I put on my envelopes. It's really fun. I remember going to a bookstore for the first time in July of 2020 when they finally opened up with all their precautions. I remember how strange it felt to be wearing a mask, and in a bookstore it was just this bizarre experience, and seeing some of my friends again from university because we all sort of ventured out of our lairs. Everything in the world just changed, and I don't know if it'll ever feel normal again because we've all been through this thing and are still going through this thing that's just unlike anything that we've had in our lifetimes. We can't talk to somebody who experienced the plague, but yeah, it was a really special thing as a reader and someone who wants to be in a bookstore at least once a week, and hadn't been in months. It was, oh my gosh, I missed them so much, so it was nice to finally go back. So after my dissertation, I didn't do much more writing. I wrote one story where I realized that what I'd been doing so much during the pandemic was just taking walks. And I would walk so far, and I would walk past the same gardens a lot and see, people's houses and what they plant in their front yards. And being from Florida, the seasons don't change very dramatically here. As a kid, I didn't really think that anything changed at all. It just got a little bit cooler in the winter. But suddenly being in Scotland, and there were actual distinct markers that made each season different, that really inspired me to write a piece of memoir that was about how I experienced time and how different time is when you have seasons. So I wrote that piece and managed to get it published in this anthology, which was really cool because that was the first time I'd published anything that was not self-published through school. So that was great, and the fact that I was able to do that during the pandemic and have all that motivation was wonderful. Didn't really carry that motivation through to this year, but when I was over there, it was a lot easier because I was surrounded by other writers. We all had the same goals, and we had to write because we had to write our dissertations and all that. So I made little places for myself to write, and I think that's important, is to have a sense of coziness and inspiration, to surround yourself with things that do inspire you. When we were allowed to travel a little bit again, I visited family in England, and I wrote on the train on the way there, and maybe that's just, as an American, it's such a romantic idea, writing on a train. So that was nice. But then I moved back to Florida in September of 2020, and it has been a lot harder since then and during all of 2021 to find the motivation to write since I'm not in school. But I do stay cozy. I finally have my own house, my own space, so I've been able to build these bookshelves. I designed these bookshelves that are made out of pipes, and I've created all these spaces in my house where I just feel like I'm being hugged by my house, and so I get a lot of reading done because it's just so cozy, and my cats are always on top of me. As for writing, I definitely have not done as much this year, and it will come in waves. Every few months I'll sort of be motivated and then spit out some story or some submission to something. It's few and far between, and I've been doing freelance work as well, so it can be hard because you're writing for a specific purpose and not so much your the stories that you really want to write. But I never really write things that I don't want to. It's just, some are more informational and not as much creative. But Anyway, I will say, in this book, my favorite stories were The Team by Tommy Orange and Systems by Charles Yu. So there's this part in The Team that I really like that's at the very beginning, and it's about time, which I think we've all experienced in such a weird way recently. You'd been staring at a wall in your office for what amount of time you weren't sure. Time slipped that way lately, as if behind a curtain, then back out again as something else. Here as an internet hole, there is a walk on your street you insisted on calling a hike with your wife and son. Here is a book your eyes look at that you don't comprehend. There is crippling depression. Here is observing circling turkey vultures. There is your ever-imminent anxiety. Here is a failed Zoom call. There is a homeschooling shift with your son. Here is April, May, already gone. There is the obsession over the body count, the nameless numbers rising on endless graphics of animated maps. Time was not on your side or anyone's. It was dreaming its waste with you, as you, hidden and loud as the sun behind a cloud. First of all, just like the poetic beauty and rhythm of that paragraph. Love it. But the way that he describes time is so perfect because I have found myself at least doing something or not doing something, and then suddenly it's been hours or months, and there's really no telling which one it's going to be. You just kind of look around and you're like, oh, I have no idea when I am right now. When am I? It's the most bizarre thing, and I don't know if it's ever going to feel normal again. Maybe time has always felt strange and it's just been made more apparent because of the pandemic. But I'll finish with, there's this part in Charles Yu's story, which is Systems, and it's all about, it's like the things that people search on Google during the pandemic. And just this bit right near the end that says, community is how it spreads, community is how it is solved. I really love that. I always put a little sticky thing on the things that I like. So community is how it spreads, community is how it is solved. That really got me because I think for a lot of us, mostly like the younger generation, we have never experienced anything on such a global scale. There is not really a corner of the earth that this pandemic has left alone. So we are all, as the human community, experiencing this together. And one of the worst things about the pandemic, about the virus, I remember especially at the beginning, was that it makes us see each other as the enemy. When I was grocery shopping, or anytime I was out towards the beginning of all this, I remember people would just not look in each other's eyes anymore. Nobody was talking to each other. Everyone was scurrying around, scared. And I think we've gotten better now, but I was scared for a while that we would never communicate with each other in the same way. And I think that's one of the great things about stories, because they bring us together and they allow us to communicate in a way that, we can't always do with just normal conversation. So we are all learning how to adapt and come together in new ways, and I think definitely, maybe I'm biased, but stories are always central to that in my mind, because we share our experiences with each other and we get closer that way, and we realize that we are not each other's enemies. The only way that we can solve anything is by all of us coming together. So yeah, I look forward to reading the rest of this, and thank you so much for joining. If you're in the book club, I hope you have a great conversation about this book, and if you're watching on my channel, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.